Hey class, welcome back. Today we're still talking about colonial America. We're talking about the Pilgrims and the Plymouth Colony. We're moving on to another colony. We've talked about the lost colony of Roanoke so far. We've talked about Jamestown. And today we're talking about the Plymouth Colony. And yes, the Plymouth Colony, you're all familiar with the Pilgrims. Everybody's familiar with the story of the Pilgrims. And that's what we're talking about today. Some of their hardships they went through, some of the things that it took for them to build their colony. It's a lot like Jamestown. They went through a lot of the same struggles, but they came through. But they're they they came to the new world not looking for a place to stay, but looking for religion. Okay, freedom of religion, because where they were being persecuted in England for the religion. So that's who we're talking about today: the Pilgrims and the Plymouth Colony. All right, the Pilgrims they traveled to America in search of a new way of life, and they were part of a religious group called Separatists. And when I say Separatists, I mean they wanted to separate from the Church of England because the Church of England was persecuting them. They wanted to be able to worship God in their own way. They were being persecuted. They were being put in jail for their beliefs, and most of them came here looking for a new way of life. And so that's what they did. They crossed on the Mayflower here, and like I said, they came to America in search of religious freedom. They were called separatists.
Why did the Pilgrims travel to America? The Pilgrims traveled to America in search of a new way of life. Many of the Pilgrims were part of a religious group called Separatists. They were called this because they wanted to separate from the Church of England and worship God in their own way. They were not allowed to do this in England, where they were persecuted and sometimes put in jail for their beliefs. Other Pilgrims were hoping to find adventure or a better life in the New World.
All right, so they initially, when they set sail aboard two ships. It ended up just being one because one of them got a leak, and they had to go back to port. And so what they did, they crammed everybody they could onto the Mayflower, and it was 102 total passengers. And they had to leave 20 people behind off the original Speedwell was the name of the other ship. Uh, but they got as many as they could on the Mayflower, and they set sail and they left England.
Setting sail, Pilgrims initially set sail aboard two ships, the Speedwell and the Mayflower. However, not long after leaving England, the Speedwell began to leak and the Pilgrims had to return to port. Once back at port, they crowded as many passengers as possible onto the Mayflower. They managed to fit 102 total passengers on the Mayflower, but they had to leave 20 of the original Speedwell passengers behind.
All right, so they made this long voyage. If you look right here, you can see they made this long voyage across the Atlantic Ocean. It was long and difficult. They ran out of fresh water at one point. You can't drink seawater, but they ran out of fresh water at one point, and a lot of people became sick. And the storms also hit the ship really hard, and it caused one of the main beams on the ship to crack. Uh, but finally, after about 2 long months at sea, they finally reached land.
Voyage on the Mayflower. The voyage across the Atlantic Ocean was long and difficult. The extra people on the ship made the trip even worse. They ran out of fresh water and many people became sick. Storms also hit the ship very hard, causing one of the main beams to crack. 2 people died during the voyage. At one point, they considered turning back, but decided to stick it out. After 2 long months at sea, the Pilgrims finally reached land.
If you look right here, this is what it looked like probably aboard the Mayflower. Then everybody, you see how everybody's just crammed in here. It's because the ship had too many people on it, or not too many, but they had a bunch of people on it, more than what they originally had planned for. So when they arrived in New England, they decided they needed to make an agreement on how issues would be settled. So they signed this document, and it's now called the Mayflower Compact, and I'll get to what it is in just a minute on the next slide.
Mayflower Compact. When the Pilgrims arrived in New England, they decided they needed to make an agreement on how issues would be settled and the colony would be run. They signed a document that is today called the Mayflower Compact.
All right. So this compact, it declared that the colonists were loyal to the King of England, that they were Christians, they served God, and that they would make fair and just laws, and they would work each work for the good of the colony. And it was signed by 41 men. None of the women were allowed to sign this. Okay, the women didn't have rights like they do nowadays. So, and they also voted this man right here, John Carver, to be the first governor of the colony, and this was the Mayflower Compact.
Mayflower Compact continued. The compact declared that the colonists were loyal to the King of England, that they were Christians who served God, that they would make fair and just laws, and that they would each work for the good of the colony. The Mayflower Compact was signed by 41 of the Pilgrim men. The women were not allowed to sign. The men also voted John Carver to be the first governor of the colony.
All right, so after arriving in America, the Pilgrims decided, they wanted to search the coast of New England. They were looking for a good place to build a settlement, and eventually they found a location called Plymouth. And it had a calm harbor. For their ship. It had fresh water, which they needed. It had flat lands where they could plant their crops, and they also found the site. The site they built on was an abandoned site. All right, it was already abandoned, and they lived there for a little while with part of them, and then part of them lived on the Mayflower until they got things built the way they wanted it anyway.
Plymouth Colony. After arriving in America, the Pilgrims searched the coast of New England for a good place to build a settlement. They eventually found a location called Plymouth. It had a calm harbor for their ship, a river for fresh water, and flat lands that they could plant crops. They used a site that had been built already but was abandoned.
All right. So they were happy to finally be in America, but things didn't get easier to them because when they landed in the middle of winter, all right, and they weren't prepared for the cold weather that they came into. So they built them a main common house and began to build small houses for each of the families. But like I said, for a time, some of the people slept on the Mayflower, and they stayed in these abandoned houses or abandoned huts that was previously a Native American settlement. So that's what they did to begin with.
A hard winter. The Pilgrims were happy to finally be in America, but things didn't get any easier for them. They were not prepared for the cold winter. They quickly built a main common house and then began to build small houses for each of the families. For a time, some people slept on the Mayflower.
All right. So over the first winter, a lot of people got sick and died. All right. Around, at one point there was only about 6 people that was well enough to continue working and doing what they needed to do. And by the end of the winter, only 47 out of the original 102 settlers were still alive, including Governor John Carver. He died that spring, and then William Bradford was elected the new governor.
A hard winter continued. Many people got sick and died over the first winter. At one point, there were only 6 people well enough to continue working. By the end of the winter, only 47 out of the original 102 settlers were still alive. Governor John Carver died that spring, and William Bradford was elected the new governor.
All right, so Squanto and the Wampanoag, all right? The Native Americans that lived in this area, the same area as the Plymouth Colony, were the Wampanoag people, all right? And the chief of the Wampanoag was Massasoit. They made contact with him, and they established a peace treaty and agreed to trade for animal furs and stuff. Now, the Wampanoag played a very critical role in this colony succeeding at least the first winter, and so we'll get into that more in just a moment.
Squanto and the Wampanoag. The Native Americans that lived in the same area as Plymouth Colony were the Wampanoag peoples. The chief of the Wampanoag, Massasoit, made contact with the Pilgrims. They established a peace treaty and agreed to trade for animal furs.
All right, one man, this is Squanto right here. Squanto, he had traveled to Europe and he could speak some English. He was a Native American, but he could speak some English. So he agreed to stay with the Pilgrims and teach them how to survive. And when he did, he taught them how to fish. He taught them how to plant corn, where to hunt. And without his help, like I said, the colony probably wouldn't have survived.
Squanto. One Wampanoag man, Squanto, had traveled to Europe and could speak some English. He agreed to stay with the Pilgrims and teach them how to survive. He taught them how to plant corn, where to hunt and fish, and how to survive through the winter. Without Squanto's help, the colony probably wouldn't have survived.
All right. So the Pilgrims, they held this feast, which y'all today know as Thanksgiving. All right, in 1621, and they invited some of the local Wampanoag people to join them with this feast, and the feast is sometimes called the first Thanksgiving, but they continued this tradition for a few years after, and then at the end of a long drought, they began to call the feast Thanksgiving, but it didn't have your traditional food like we have at Thanksgiving here. You know, when you think of Thanksgiving, you think of turkey. Well, they didn't have turkey at this one. They probably had some deer meat and some other things but it's not the same dishes that you're accustomed to now. I'll get back to y'all on what all they had, but it wasn't turkey like you would think.
Thanksgiving. The Pilgrims held a feast after their first harvest in 1621. They invited some of the local Wampanoag people to join them. This feast is sometimes called the first Thanksgiving. They continued this tradition, and in 1623, when they were celebrating the end of a long drought, they began to call the feast Thanksgiving.
All right. So comprehension questions. On what ship did the Pilgrims sail across the Atlantic Ocean? Was it A, the Titanic, B, the Mayflower, or C, they swam across? It is B, the Mayflower.
Ding, ding, ding. We have a winner.
All right. Number 2, the Pilgrims were members of what religious group? What was the name of the religious group? I said at the beginning of it. They were A, separatist, B, voodoo, or C, Baptist. They were A, separatist. They were separatists. They wanted to separate from the Church of England and do religion the way they wanted to do it.
Ding, ding, ding. We have a winner.
Number 3, what colony did the Pilgrims establish? What colony did we talk about today? Was it A, Jamestown, B, North Carolina, or C, the Plymouth Colony? It is C, the Plymouth Colony. That's what they established. It was in New England.
Ding, ding, ding. We have a winner.
Number 4, how many original Pilgrim settlers were there? Was there A, 10, B, 50, or C, 102? There was C, 102 settlers originally, and during that first winter, all but 47 of them died because it was so rough on them. They weren't prepared for it.
Ding, ding, ding. We have a winner.
Number 5, who became governor of the Plymouth Colony after John Carver died? Was A, Christopher Columbus, B, William Bradford, or C, Marco Polo? It is B, William Bradford. After Carver died, they elected William Bradford to the governor.
Ding, ding, ding. We have a winner.
And number 6, I think there's 7 questions on this one. What did the Pilgrim men sign when they got to Plymouth? Was it A, the Mayflower Compact, B, a tree, or C, a rock? They signed the Mayflower Compact. It was all men, 41 men. No women were able to sign it. Signed the Mayflower Compact.
Ding, ding, ding. We have a winner.
And the last one, who taught the Pilgrims to grow crops and fish? A, Walter Raleigh, B, Sir Drake, or C, Squanto? It was C, Squanto.
Ding, ding, ding. We have a winner.
Without his help, they would not have survived the winter. So that is all for today. We'll be back next time talking about the Puritans, which was another religious group that was being persecuted in England. And they came and they had a great migration afterwards. So, but I will talk to y'all later. Y'all have a good day.